Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of How to Leave a Cult. I am Brooke Walker. I'm your host, and I'm excited because we have a guest today. And if you guys are new here, I just like to let everybody know this is my biography of being raised in a cult from the age of 8. And it was a church called the Church of Immortal Consciousness. It was run by Steven and Trina Camp, and I share stories of her trancing a spirit, so speaking to dead people, diving into alcoholism, diving into all different kinds of issues, from arranged marriages to manipulation and control. So that is what you're getting into today, and I'm going to introduce my guest, which is David Fields. Now, David has kindly agreed to come on, and I'm excited to have him because he was actually in the church for a short period of time. And so I'm excited to share with you guys his perspective and his story because I think it encapsulates so much, but he also has a different point of view on some things that I can't share because I was a child when I came into the church. So, David, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Brooke. Pleasure. My pleasure.
Great.
Definitely.
So, let's start from the beginning. How
hmm
did you find Trina and Steven and
hmm
get involved with the church initially? What was the first step?
hmm Well, first of all, I was involved with another group, the TM organization, Transcendental Meditation, and that was from 1971. Although I'd started meditating, transcendental meditation. I started meditating in '69, and then I became a teacher in '72. And I worked for the organization for 7 or 8 years. So when we met Stephen and Trina, I had just left the TM movement,
Okay.
and so that evolved into a very culty situation as well, but it didn't have the same power dynamics. Very, very different dynamics there. There wasn't any pressure to join or pressure to leave or not leave or whatever. There wasn't any of those dynamics. It was a much bigger organization, and it had its mission to teach TM and whatnot. But that I think played into what's going to unfold in our conversation. But
Sure.
so Faye and I had gotten together. My wife Faye and I had gotten together, connected about a year before we met Stephen and Trina. There was a lot of change happening in our lives. A lot of change of lifestyle. And Faye left a marriage, and a position at a university, and I'm leaving the TM movement. So we had heard about rebirthing,
Mm.
breath work, and that had an appeal to us. So I don't remember if we had started rebirthing yet, but I think we had in
Right.
Portland, and and I think that we were doing the 10 sessions that they recommended to begin with, and it was very beneficial, very helpful. And a woman that we were close to, friends of ours, who also had been involved in TM, brought Stephen and Trina to their house for a trance.
Okay.
And Faye and I had been exposed to a medium a year before when we first got together, and she did automatic handwriting. And it was very helpful at that time. It put into perspective our relationship and the purpose of our relationship. And it directed me in a positive way to studying psychology and whatnot. It was a very helpful little window of time when we worked with this medium. And so when we had the opportunity to attend a trance a year later, it seemed very apropos.
Yeah.
Yeah, and given that we had had a very positive experience prior, we were open to it.
Right.
And so we attended a trance. Yeah.
Well, and I just to catch anybody up who's not familiar. So TM is Transcendental Meditation,
Mm-hmm.
which was very popular during that time. I know my parents got into it, and they got into it because they knew the science behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing transcendental meditation when my dad was in law school. He
Interesting.
actually credits his ability, actually before law school, when he was going to Dartmouth, and he ended up getting the entire hockey team on doing
Amazing.
transcendental meditation. There's a write-up in him back in that day in like the Washington Post, because he went from one of the worst hockey players to one of the best hockey players, and he credited transcendental meditation
Amazing.
for that. So, and it became popularized, I think, a lot from the Beatles,
Yeah, totally.
and then rebirthing. And you'll have to help explain this one, because
Mm-hmm.
rebirthing, I remember it being talked about, but I never experienced it. And, but rebirthing, there was a lot of people that were, all these communities kind of, you know,
Ah,
were very intertwined with each other. Similar people would bounce around them, but
exactly.
and rebirthing is a breathing technique. And what kind of, could you explain rebirthing just briefly?
Yeah. It's sort of the beginning of breath work, which has evolved into various branches and various forms. Breath work now has become very popular, right?
Yes.
And there are different approaches to that, but it all involves rhythmic breathing.
Okay.
And breath work is a very powerful way of opening up the unconscious.
Mm,
It has many, and it does more than that as well. It also balances. There's different rhythms of the breath that work to bring us into a parasympathetic state, a relaxed state, a
okay.
deeply relaxed state, which
Right.
allows for healing and all kinds of things. But it also can be very effective in releasing suppressed emotions,
Nice. Okay.
depending on the type of breath work you do. And so, all the years that I was into TM works really in a more fundamental way, but it doesn't directly address the emotional body, our
Gotcha.
emotional natures. And so, after at that point, about 8 or 9 years of meditating, it was starting to activate a lot of stuff in the unconscious. And it turns out I had quite a history. I had a traumatic child, in many ways, a traumatic childhood, and alcoholic
Sure.
parents and all that. So that was starting to get stirred up in meditation, but TM doesn't address it in a direct way.
Mm,
And there isn't really a context for processing what comes up on the psychological, emotional level, if that's needed. And so that was what started moving me out of the TM movement, was to, because um, I had things coming up psychologically that were going to need to be addressed on that
sure.
level.
And
So
you needed more than what you had. Yeah,
exactly,
for sure.
for especially for the integration of it. TM is a wonderful method,
Sure.
meditation, and there are various kinds of meditation, but meditation has been part of my life my whole life. And
Right.
after that, and after the whole thing with Steven and Trina, I continued to meditate. I could still continue to meditate.
Nice.
But so rebirthing was a way of helping to integrate and explore and heal at a deep emotional level.
Okay.
And that was really the emphasis. That was really my focus, our focus at that time. The need of the time, just the need of my own process. So here we're being invited to a trance, but also they were rebirthers,
Yes.
and they were certified rebirthers, which means that they had some experience there and they had gone through some process of certification. And so that was really what drew us to Steven and Trina. And it turns out her sister was also there, who was also a trance medium.
Sandra.
Yeah,
Okay.
Sandra Trance, Red Fox, Trina Trance, spirit named Dr. Duran. And so we sat in that trance, and it was very powerful. And there was no question that these entities, they knew aspects of us that, it was quite profound. And
Right.
we were very open and very trusting. And so it was a good thing. It was actually a very helpful, very beneficial. And Steven and Trina had not really flipped into um, this authoritarian position
Okay.
that was going to come. There was more. It was much more relaxed, and that impacted us. It impacted us, and there was the sense that and what they modeled in their relationship was something that was attractive to us. There was a level of commitment and integrity in their relationship
Hmm.
that we responded to.
Right.
And so and then it was we were informed at some point, either in the trance or we may have been on a mailing list at that point, that they were doing a seminar, a week-long seminar in Seattle.
Okay.
We were in Portland when we
Right.
met them, and it was a rebirthing seminar, but it would be connected with Dr. Duran and the trance and all that. So we attended that, and we lived with them. We stayed with them during that week, and it was very powerful. And the process itself was very powerful. And again, we found it to be very positive and very helpful.
Right.
And so, and again, I think it was also connected to the fact that they were integrating principles of relationship and committed relationships that were helpful to us,
Right.
and emphasizing transparency,
Right.
emphasizing kind of a radical honesty, you could say,
Right. Right.
which would evolve into, as you know, and we can get into that, a whole other level of control and all this stuff. But for us and for our marriage, we weren't married yet, but we were soon to be married. No, I guess we were married. We married in December of 1980. We met them in the fall of 80.
Okay.
So by the time we did the workshop, we were married. They were modeling to us a quality of relationship that we responded to and that we found to be helpful.
Well, I know that I mean, just thinking, because I think it's important that people understand the way things were at the time, right? We're talking
Mm-hmm,
about,
mm-hmm,
early
mm-hmm,
80s. I mean,
mm-hmm,
I know that my parents have shared that one of the things was that they were trying to do something different than what their parents had done. And there was this
mm-hmm,
idea of the stuffiness of the generation above them being very like that Ward and June Cleaver type of idea, right? So you had
mm-hmm,
to look a
mm-hmm,
certain way and you had to be a certain way, and it was very performance based. So
mm-hmm.
for them, they were looking for something that was outside of the traditional stuff because they felt like it was a breath of fresh air to find these other communities that seemed more authentic at the time.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, and I think that the term I used was radical honesty. I think that was a useful principle at that time for us. And there were certain principles like that were woven into an understanding of living in integrity that we found useful for the rest of our lives.
Right.
There was a certain foundation there, that was certain aspects of that became part of our foundation.
Right.
And I think that it served us beautifully, especially because we began working as therapists. We began doing seminars and retreats with couples.
Okay.
And there were certain aspects of that teaching that was very helpful.
Sure.
So that's where it started.
Nice.
And the difficulty comes in when you see that when there's the idea or the belief that the teachers are in some way infallible.
Yeah.
And the infallibility comes in with Dr. Duran.
Yes.
And there was that explicit sense that he knew that
Yes.
whatever was coming through Trina was the truth, was the final understanding.
Yeah.
And we bought that. And
We all did.
maybe that was an extension of having had a guru in the past, and in the guru disciple relationship, in that model that's come from the East to the West, the guru is considered to be infallible if they're so-called enlightened. How does one ever test that? How does one know that? But having been through all that, right, and having another guru subsequently that did not have any problem. I had no problem with the TM movement, actually. But there are problems in that model of infallibility. And, and the Eastern practices and teachings have had great difficulty in translating because of that whole idea of infallibility. So we just projected that onto Steven and Trina. And because they were Duran's ministers,
yeah,
they had a certain thing you couldn't argue.
Sure.
You couldn't challenge.
No, you couldn't.
Big problem there. Maybe we needed that at the time because of our own insecurities and because we were young and we were immature. But they had that kind of stamp of approval big time, with Dr. Duran being there. And what he shared, what came through Trina was very helpful and very useful. And he directed me to go to school. He supported my desire to go to school to study psychology.
That is fascinating to me.
Isn't it though?
It became so anti-therapy.
I'll bet.
Once the cult became once the larger part of the church, it was very anti-therapy. There was a time my baby sister went, and at the time, I think she was a teenager, and her and my mom got ripped to shreds by Duran.
Wow.
About that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
a few years later, I went to school to get a psychology degree, and nobody ever said anything to me. So it's interesting.
It is interesting. And of course, to have an understanding of psychology, if you went into counseling,
yeah,
when you were a member of that community, I would think that could be a problem. There could Absolutely. Be some real cognitive dissonance there, right?
It's going to be huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, early on, there was not that kind of control going on.
Sure.
And so, and I'll give you an example of where it was helpful. I'm 26 years old. Say I'm 27 now. I'm going to college, and we're now connected with Steven and Trina, though we lived in Portland, they lived in Arizona, but we had taken the workshop. And we brought them to Portland. We did a workshop. We organized a workshop for them. And I'm surrounded by young girls, young women, and in school. And so we're in a trance with Dr. Duran, having a private with them. And I bring up this dilemma, right? This temptation, and of just having these young women around me all the time. And I remember he just said it so directly, but so clearly. He said, "Don't create karma, David. Look at this. Don't create karma." And that little bit of perspective, that little reminder, that little insight, that support was helpful to me. And because I trusted Duran implicitly and explicitly, I trusted his guidance. I just took that to heart, like a father figure
Right. Right.
of, and there was that sense that Trina and Steven cared for us
Right.
and they cared about us.
Yes.
And so that guidance was helpful. But just that little thing, I always remembered that because I was at the point in my life and my marriage and my relationship with Faye that I wanted to get it right.
Mm.
I really wanted to. I was deeply in love with Faye,
Right.
and that has sustained us for 40 plus years of marriage.
Right.
And we've had ups and downs and ins and outs
Of
like
course.
everyone does.
Life.
And we've been through pretty much, you know, the gauntlet. But that, so I look back at that as being very helpful. Again, that was a way that sort of connected my heart and my faith in Steven and Trina and Duran. Just that simple as one example
Yeah.
where it just helped me align. It helped me stay aligned.
Sure. So at what,
Mm-hmm.
so you guys are the first time you decided to move to Arizona to be a part of
Yeah,
the church.
yeah,
How did
right.
that happen? What was
Well,
the,
well, they were teaching their immortal monogamous relationships, right? That was an idea that was a term that they were now right there that they were promoting immortal monogamous relationships. Now I look back and I scratch my head at that, but you know, at the time it was all it was just part of the shtick. And so we couldn't get enough of Steven and Trina and Duran. I mean, that's just where we were. We just couldn't get enough of it. It was so interesting. And the trance was so interesting. And it was a context for us to become aware of the psychological and the emotional, because it was still integrated with rebirthing, although they were about to leave that, but it was still connected to our own exploration and healing of our emotional bodies. And so um that was serving us, and so the whole thing was in service to really to our growth at that point. And so we were now pregnant with our first child, with Julian. This would have been 81, 82.
okay.
And he was due in May. And they did one of their first workshops in Mesa, a week-long immortal monogamous relationship. They're training. And that was going to be, I think, in April or early May. But anyway, we signed up for it. And so we flew down there, Faye very pregnant, super pregnant. And we met your mom and dad there.
Okay.
And it was during that workshop, as it was winding up, that we decided to move down there. And so Faye stayed.
Okay.
She stayed, and I flew back with a couple guys, and closed shop and finished up business and rented a U-Haul and moved us down there. And so we were one of the first people to join the community.
Okay.
I
Okay.
mean, I don't know who there were just a couple other there were two other couples, I think, at that time.
Were Bobby and Raylene there at the time?
Right, Bobby and Raylene and
They were always given credit as being the first ones,
well, we were, yeah, they were
OGs.
right there. They were right there, and another couple named Steve and I can't remember, Patricia. I think it was Patricia.
Was that Steve Wrench?
No, I can't remember
Okay.
this couple, but um, anyway, I think that was the beginning of the thing. And we had our child there. We had Julian there. It was going to be a home birth. Your mom kicked into we segued with your mom there, and then it ended up being a hospital birth.
Okay.
And Stephen and I and Faye headed out and ended up at Maricopa hospital where Julian was born. That was also very bonding for Steven and I. So again, you see how these things can touch you emotionally.
Sure.
Very bonding. Steve was right there. Steven was right there. And so that was another connection that we had there. And then the dynamics started to happen that happened between people when you move in and you live together, and the way and the means of the confrontive means of processing, right? Processing people's emotional stuff or relationship stuff, whatever it is. That style of confrontation really kicked in.
Yeah.
It really kicked in, and looking back, I hadn't really cracked into my own trauma yet.
Okay.
And so that means of healing, of working with people, it's very unskillful.
Yes.
But it was coming out of a time, right? In the late 60s and early 70s, there were the encounter groups. Mm-hmm. And that was like very early stages of the human potential movement, and we weren't aware of how to work with trauma.
No.
That even the concept of trauma was not there. You didn't hear that term.
No,
you just didn't hear it in psychology either. There was the more experiential psychologies like Gestalt, and then breathwork kicked in, segued into that. And there were the more talking kind of therapies like, I'm trying to think of,
like Jungian.
I can't remember now. Yeah, but also there was also kind of the human potential movement of Maslow, and then evolving into, compassionate listening and a more compassionate way of working. But there was also this experiential confrontive approach. And we were always drawn more to that sort of experiential process. But it was very crude and confrontational. We know that's a very crude way of working with people. But that was happening in those days, and Steven and Trina were sort of the masters. That was sort of the icons of that type of approach. Let's put it that way. They weren't well known, but I'm saying that they exemplified that sort of in-your-face approach. Yes. And that was probably the last thing I needed, for, if you look at it just technically speaking. But that's how I started to crack into my stuff. I had no idea how much was in there, but it didn't take long. It didn't take long at all living there for me to get major activated. And the more intense the processing got, the more resistance and the more my defenses would come up, right? And that's natural. That's a self-protective. That's for self-protection.
Especially if you've had a traumatic childhood. If you've had a traumatic childhood and then somebody starts trying to blow that up to try to get it out of you in some way, that's like re-assault. It's like being re-assaulted.
Well, it re-traumatizes you.
It
actually
does. It re-traumatizes.
And here's the thing: if you didn't have something there in your background, you probably you wouldn't have been attracted to that to begin with.
Yes, familiarity draws us to things that are also very unhealthy.
It does. Abuse tends to attract abuse.
It does.
And so looking back, I realized we wouldn't have been attracted to that if it wasn't in our past. If there wasn't abuse in our past, I don't think we would have. I think our own self-esteem would have probably protected us from that approach, But
so then you guys didn't stick around. So
we left after 4 months.
Okay.
Yeah, 4 challenging months, and Steven and Trina were starting to show that kind of authoritarian approach, that sense of sort of dominance,
Right.
was more evident now that we were living with them. But it was nothing of what was to come. It was still mild compared to what was come. So at any rate, we left, and we left without their blessings.
Okay.
And then we moved back, and we got our feet back on. We got our feet back on the ground. I completed my degree. Actually, I finished my degree. We began a counseling practice. Faye was also a professional astrologer. Oh. So we began our own work of counseling and relationship counseling and seminars and integrating breath work and phase work and astrology. And we developed a successful practice in Portland over a number of years. And then we had our second child. And then there was always in the back of my mind, I felt like that it was never finished with Steven and Trina. I always felt like there was something incomplete there. And looking back, especially since you and I reconnected,
sure,
I began to ask myself, what was it that caused me to contact them again? And I realize now it was some sense of guilt that I had somehow failed, that because I didn't get their blessing, it's as if I had somehow failed. I think I still held them on kind of a pedestal, although it was probably unconscious.
Yeah.
I think that I still saw them as some kind of authority, that and I was feeling the need for guidance.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the sense I have when I look back at what would have generated that reconnection. But I ended up calling them, and I acknowledged how much we had learned from them early on. And it was a way of thanking them. And I think I did. I thanked them, and I thanked them for what we had learned. And I don't think I apologized for anything, but I probably felt apologetic in some way. And we ended up having several phone calls. And then I decided to invite them. And this was coming more from me than Faye. I decided to invite them, and we would funnel our clients, the couples and the individuals we're working with. We would do a seminar and invite our clients.
So these are all of your guys' clients from your
all of them, and
a few other doing therapy with and stuff like that.
Right. Okay. Probably 15 people or so. Yeah. And a few other people came.
Right.
And as soon as we picked them up at the airport, the vibe was really different. They were really kind of heavy and hard.
Thriving group by then, because
and hardcore. This was 89. This was 90.
This was 90. Okay, so we joined in 86, and so by then, I mean, it was going pretty strong. I mean, there was probably at least 100 or more people by then, which had grown dramatically from when you had been there.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, the thing is here, I learned so much from this. My God, I learned a lot, but what a difficult path. So the seminar begins. And I think they probably tranced right off the bat. I think Duran tranced. And it was a very different trance. I mean, just the way he was working with people, and the kind of condescending and sort of sarcastic vibe in the trance was just setting the tone right off the bat. This kind of sarcasm that I'd never heard before and never associated with spirit before.
As probably most people wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the seminar began in the morning. It's like Saturday morning. I think the trance was Friday night, Saturday, and they just started ripping into me.
Ripping into you.
Into me, yeah,
Okay.
personally, and the way I had left, because I was very challenging when we left, and they took some. We had some pictures we had given them, and they wouldn't give me back. This whole kind of power dynamic kicked in, and I was very strong and clear in that area. But I was actually confronted them
Right.
before we left. Well, my God, they brought all this out, and they had this whole twist on the story of our leaving, and all they really started nailing me in the group, and it came on so strong, and it was such a power dynamic, it was such a power play, that I didn't I felt like it was I couldn't defend myself.
Yeah.
It just simply took me so much, it threw me so much off center, it caught me so much off guard, that I just opened somehow, and just I just let this thing play out. Interesting dynamics there. I could probably find more on that, but for whatever reason, it was just like this onslaught. But it was very skillfully done. I mean, they knew exactly what they were doing.
Master level.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, they were just sticking it in and turning it, and they were giving this narrative on who I was and who I really was. And it was basically turning the whole group against me in a way. Now, nobody in the group, because we were uh, connected with all these people. We had been working with some people for a couple of years. Everybody was just sort of taking this in and witnessing this thing. And they were working on Faye, for putting up with me.
Yeah.
And they were implying that that there were betrayals, and there were secrets, and there was this whole other side of David. And I mean, I certainly tried to defend myself. I think there were times when I would definitely kick in, but it was just like this bulldozer. And
Yeah. It's hard to really like explain how those rooms were
really,
when Trina and Steven were doing the
oh my God,
process,
yeah,
and they would come at somebody with any particular thing at the time. I mean, it was such a psychological mind fuck that
deep, deep,
it was.
powerful.
And then at the same time turning everybody in the room against you, and then turning your wife against you on
Yeah,
top of that. Like,
exactly. And it's like taking someone took their hand and just put it right into your third chakra, right into your stomach, right into that power right chakra, and just grabbed you there and just hit you there. And I felt it when we first saw them again. We picked them up at the airport. I felt it right then. There was this incredible control trip going on. Right, I could just feel them grabbing the right at the third chakra, right in the stomach, and we were in for a ride. So by the end of the workshop, Faye and our children, Julian and Angela. Julian was now 7 or 8, and Angela was a baby,
okay.
a year old. They were going back with Steven and Trina.
So So you've completely alienated her
Oh my God.
from
It-
you,
yeah,
and they are taking
yeah,
her and your children with them back
yeah,
to Arizona.
yeah. And I resisted it.
Of course,
I resisted it in
you
the
should have.
I resisted it in the seminar. Yeah, what I realize now, it's not that I wasn't that I didn't resist from the get-go. It's just that it was almost pointless. It was just so overwhelming. It was just such a calculated control to manipulation.
Well, plus you have a background of trauma anyway. So it
Exactly.
gets you in that because your response to it is, you when you have a background in trauma, you have a difficulty being able to advocate for yourself properly anyway, unless
Well,
you've really, really worked through that.
definitely. Well said. Yeah, yeah.
Especially against somebody that you've had respect for and
Exactly.
that you have, put in a certain position and role in your thinking and life.
Absolutely. And there's the assumption that you're wrong. I mean, I hadn't really processed the trauma that was in my mind body yet. Even though we were doing therapy, even though I had been in therapy, I hadn't really cracked into it and really understood the nature of it and gotten down to the root of the thing. So definitely, one is vulnerable, and one's own sense of self-worth and self-esteem, right? There was obviously much healing I had to do there. And so they were, so I could be manipulated that way. I could doubt myself, right? It's that self-doubt that they play on.
So they've blown up your practice,
Yeah, in effect.
taken your wife and kids.
Yeah.
So,
Well, there was really no question I was going to come with them. I was going to follow.
right.
And so, I stayed back, and, and some of our clients, everybody helped me. They helped me move and the whole works. I mean, it was wild, and it was really confusing for everybody that we were working with naturally, and heartbreaking in some ways, to watch this phenomena. There were so many lessons in it for us, Brooke. But I'm not gonna. I could go into that forever. I mean, certainly an extended session, but it catalyzed so much self-reflection over the next several years, as you can imagine. But the gist of it is that I went ahead and broke the lease on our home and moved us down there. So now it's 1990,
Okay.
and and all I could think of was getting us home. I just, and as soon as I moved us down there, we were staying in it. They made us a space in a living room of a home with two other couples,
Okay.
and it was rough. And I was just kind of shell shocked almost at what had happened. It was so dramatic, and it was so traumatic as well. And so, naturally, I don't feel victimized anymore, and I got through that years ago. So I don't want to give the impression that we were just victims of the situation. Certainly, we were victims to a certain extent, but again, I had to work through the causes of all that sort of, of everything that happened.
Right.
And I took Steven and Trina off that hook. I just, I basically took responsibility for what I had to learn in the situation,
Sure.
as did Faye. So I haven't been blaming them for years over the circumstance, but I certainly had to look at the thing clearly. At any rate, we moved down there, and the energy now is so much heavier than it was before. They're living up in Payson,
Oh,
right? That's all shifting there, and we're in Mesa,
Right.
and Steve Wrench is and Marlo are the head of the thing. And so after we'd been there, I would say about a week or two at the most, there was a meeting, and we attended the meeting, and it was about us, and they just started lighting into us.
Was it just like you, Stephen Marlowe?
It was a group.
Okay, so it was
Yeah, it was a
one of the public
yeah,
process.
it was a group dynamic, and um, this is when the manipulation, the psychological manipulation and abuse really kicked in, and I was just I was accused of all kinds of crimes, and you know, I mean, it was just this incredible, heavy confrontation that I was that I was that I had raped women and raped and pillaged, and that there was this whole other side to me that Faye knew nothing about, and that I had affairs, that I had secrets from Faye that I wasn't telling anyone, and they just kept on it, and they kept on it, and it was Steven and at that, I don't know, Marlo wasn't there, I don't think, at that. It was Steven and Sandra.
Right. She may have had, I mean, she had a little one, so it's
Yeah. But it was incredible. I mean, it was just incredible. I mean, it was like
Steve Wrench
almost
was
almost
awesome.
unimaginable.
Yeah. Steve Wrench
How?
was his pet name was Dr. Death. And so
Yeah,
he
I'll
was
see why. But
embraced for being, you know,
well, this was incredible.
cruel.
This was incredibly cruel and violent.
Yeah.
And so, at a certain point, I stood up. I told him to fuck off. I told, I think Sandra was saying something to me, or blah, 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 and I just said, fuck you, fuck you. And I stood up and I started to walk out. And then there was just this gang on me. And Steve jumped on me, and a couple other guys, they threw me to the ground. And Steve did this chokehold like this on so I was about to go unconscious. At the last millisecond, he let go. But I was bleeding. I had, you know, scratched up, bruised,
Because they put
battered.
you on the tile floor.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And so, you can imagine what that was like. And you can,
Yes.
and you can imagine the trauma there, and what it must have activated. But at any rate,
Sure.
that was it. And that was, I mean, that was it.
And I want to kind of like share with people, like when I talk about the process, it's hard for me to reshare the words that are used, but those are the types of words that they would use. They would use words like rape and molestation flippantly, and
Exactly.
with a very intense nature, with no reason for using those words other than I don't know,
Well, it was for a fact. It was for it was a form of violence.
yeah, it was.
Yeah, a form of beating you up.
Yeah, for sure.
So I was in shock, and of course Faye was completely in shock.
So how were you guys, since you had just moved down, how were you guys doing since you had just moved to Arizona?
Yeah, good question. Well, Faye wouldn't talk to me.
Okay.
She had been told not some kind of instruction
They
there.
did that. They would do the whole
Yeah,
silent treatment thing. It was like,
yeah, yeah.
which is such a horrible tactic. Like, but I
Yeah, yeah,
remember being raised that people did that with me and that I was supposed to do that. Like if somebody was really horrible or had wronged you in some way, then you give them the silent treatment. Like it was just so hurtful.
yeah. It's like she was instructed not to talk to me one on one. And so she was busy all day doing something. I don't know what she was doing, caring for the kids for sure. And I was now working
Okay.
um, in the construction.
Okay.
And but there was no communication between us. You know, we were separated all day, and then there was this she was just like pushing me away. It's like there's just this, I could tell that they had been working on her, obviously, because this was for the best.
Yes. I
And
can almost imagine the things that they would say to her because
yeah,
I
incredible,
saw that so much and grew up in it so
incredible.
much that it was like I can tell the things that they would have,
I'm sure you
with this
could.
abusive man and all the things
Yeah,
they would have said about you to her.
yeah. There was this statement that men were assholes,
Yeah.
right?
In
that was
quotes.
that was something you heard over, and men are assholes. So I was now an asshole, and Julian was going to school, and after that, after getting beaten up, Julian was distressed, and so he drew a picture of of this man with with scars all over him. That was obviously his father,
Wow.
and it was murder. And so after that happened, I think it was just a couple days after that happened, maybe the next day after, we had another meeting, and and I and I think there was some awareness that they had crossed the line with me. I remember supposedly Steven and Trina, of course, they heard about all this,
Right.
and I think that supposedly they had been talking to Steve and Marlo about this, and Steve apologized to me. Steve Wrench apologized. But by that time, it didn't matter what anybody said to me. I mean, I was so defended,
Yeah.
and but I wasn't acting out. I wasn't particularly acting it out. I was just holding my cards really close to my chest. I was just trying to figure out what to do now. So I think the next day after that, or 2 days later, or a few days later, we had another meeting, and it was again a group situation. And now he was processing me on the money I was withholding. Now it was much lighter than the time before. It wasn't heavy, but still he was calling me a liar, and that I surely had credit cards that I wasn't fessing up to. And actually, I wasn't holding anything back. I wish I had.
So let me side note that really quick because I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious about this. So
Mm-hmm.
did you have to pay money when you guys came this time, even though they kidnapped your wife and children?
I think we gave them what we had.
Did you have credit cards at the time that you handed
No,
over? Okay, because there was
no,
a
we
lot of
were.
people who did.
Oh, sure, we were using credit cards. We had decided a year or two before that we just stopped. We canceled it. It wasn't even an option for us. We decided not to play that game anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, of course, a lot of people would have credit cards. That's just the American way.
Right. Well, and they would take people's credit cards and then
Sure,
they would
run them
begin
up.
running them up,
Of course they would,
pay
and
for
then
all types of things without
and
asking, without
of
permission.
course, of
And
course, and it would ruin their credit.
yeah.
So we didn't. And again, I wasn't lying to him, just like I wasn't lying before. And I hadn't lied to my wife. None of that. None of that. It so happens none of that was true. I was accused of having had affairs. I was accused of other, relationships outside of my marriage. It so happens none of that was true. I had no secrets. Anyway, they processed me on that, on the money thing, but it was a lot lighter. And somehow, for that little window of time, I was a little. I was untouchable after what we'd been through, after the previous thing, confrontation. There was something inside that was almost detached from the situation, and it didn't affect me one way or another. But they were certainly going for our finances and accusing me of lying again. But none of that really touched me because the other process went so deep. And all I could think of then, from that point on, all I could think of was how to get us home and how to get us out of there. And it was extremely painful because Faye was against me.
Sure. Yeah, you're like, did you ever think about leaving without her?
Well, it would cross my mind, more like a fantasy.
Yeah.
More like a fantasy. The fact of the matter is I couldn't leave my wife and children.
100%.
That's just the bottom line.
Yeah.
And if we didn't have a good marriage, that would have been the time that would probably have happened. But the fact of the matter is I was between a rock and a hard place. I wasn't going to leave Faye.
Yeah.
And the kids there. And here we were. And furthermore, Faye was somehow opposed to me.
Yeah.
It was an unspoken thing, but she was somehow, getting some kind of instruction. And so she wouldn't talk to me. So this lasted about 6 weeks, I would say, 6 weeks after, a month after this confrontation happened. And every minute of every day, I was just thinking how the hell to get us out of there. And finally, one night, this is when the intervention happened. And I'm trying to think if a phone call from a friend of ours came first, or at any rate, one night about 3:00 in the morning, neither one of us could sleep, and I looked at it. I think I held her. I think I just put my arms around her, and I said, "Faye, I've never lied to you.
Yeah.
I have never lied to you. I've never betrayed you. I have no secrets, no relationships on the side, nothing, never have." And she believed me. There was at least a window of opening, there was a little crack of daylight at that moment. She was so worn out. I mean, she was so worn out from this whole situation. And I was lined up. I was ever since that confrontation happened, and I got through it, and I was able to find a balance within myself again. I was lined up inside, so nothing was shifting for me, and she knows me. And in that moment, something began to open up, and we started talking and just sharing about this circumstance and the situation. And it wasn't long after that, I would say within 48 hours, as fate, as destiny would have it, a couple that we were very close to, that had been clients of ours, called. They called us one evening, and they just said, "We want you to know we love you and we appreciate the work we did with you." And many of us feel that way, and thank you. It was really touching. So getting that support, that affirmation, because when you've been beaten down like that and traumatized as much, your self-image, everything begins to collapse. You're questioning yourself. And I'd gone through a major, you know, self-inquiry about myself. And I mean, this whole process, it led me to it really challenged me in terms of my esteem and my self-worth. And I have to say, it strengthened me, though. It actually took my process a lot deeper as I came through this and survived this. But at any rate, in my case, at any rate, it was wonderful to get that affirmation. And then at the very end, they said, well, if we can ever help you, you always have a place. You can always stay with us. And that was all it took. And Faye and I got off the phone. We talked for a little bit, and then I called them back and I said, here's what you can do. We need plane tickets for Faye and the kids. And we're going to need to stay with you for a while. Right. And I'm going to need money. Excuse me. Yeah. And I'm going to need money to get us back and to rent a truck. And it all happened. It all happened like that. And it was we were on. And within 24 hours, Faye was gone with the kids. And within 72 hours, I had us packed up and we headed back to Oregon.
Wow.
Never talked to Steven and Trina. Trina had called. I think she had actually. I think she had called, or somebody had called, and we talked to Steven and Trina briefly. And I wouldn't talk to her, and I wasn't going to talk to Steven. And I remember Faye just saying she asked if we wanted to talk to her. Steven asked if we wanted to talk to Duran, and I said no. And I remember Faye just saying that this was so foreign to us.
Yeah.
And the experience was so heavy.
Horrible.
And what had happened was she told Trina that, and that there was no going back.
Yeah.
So when we got back, needless to say, we had a lot of healing to do.
Right.
I mean, for the next year, it was we just recuperated, and we were fortunate that we had friends that supported us during that time.
100%. And I think that like everything that you shared shows really like the way they alienate your wife. Like that's a reason you can't leave, because you guys aren't together enough to make a unified decision to get out of there, right?
Exactly.
And then
exactly.
The amount of work you have to do once you get out to kind of rebuild.
Oh my God.
Not just financially from moving twice across,
yeah,
the
yeah,
US.
yeah,
And
with kids
in a matter of a couple months,
yeah,
and then having to rebuild a practice that you had blown
yeah,
up by then.
yeah,
Like, and because you guys are a perfect example of what they did.
yeah,
Perfect example. They did that
yeah,
more than that time.
yeah, yeah, obviously.
They did something similar to my mom at one point. She went to a seminar, and then it was like, sending telling my dad what he had to do now, because, it was like they've kidnapped his wife type of stuff. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, that was rough. That was rough. You know, Brooke, in the healing of that sort of thing, I came to I forgave them
Yeah.
over time. I just forgave them.
Right.
Um, because I had to move on.
Yeah.
And I had to understand the roots of that. What gave rise to, why are we drawn to a kind of authoritarian type situation? Why are we drawn to them? The tendencies were there when we first met them.
Yeah.
You could say, but we didn't know that, we didn't have that understanding that those tendencies were there. So, there's something that you're attracted to these things unconsciously. And so it became a catalyst for our own study, our own self-study and investigation, and our own healing in the long run. And so when one works through that sort of thing, something that dramatic and traumatic, I came to appreciate the role that they played. And there was an essence of those teachings in the early days that that have held up in terms of certain aspects of just honesty and transparency in my marriage. Now you can take that too far.
Yeah.
You don't have to share every iota of what with your, but when you mature and you grow together, you certainly don't have to feel guilt or shame about your humanness.
Yeah.
Don't ever have to feel guilt or shame. So those are, but there are certain things we extracted, certain principles we extracted from those teachings that were there in the early days, at the beginning, that we appreciated. We appreciated the support they gave to our marriage. We appreciated that they're um, um, establishing boundaries,
Right.
good boundaries,
Right.
in our marriage.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting how it seemed to kind of change or intensify or all of that kind of stuff. But I do appreciate hearing the draw that you guys had to it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
really appreciate you sharing your story.
Most
Thank you.
welcome. You're most welcome.
Is there anything
Most
else you want to
welcome.
share or?
No, unless you can pull anything more out, I think we kind of we sort of got to the heart of it, didn't we?
Yeah, I think so. No,
Yeah, yeah,
no, I think it's wonderful. Um I think it's wonderful because it just encapsulates so many different things about this particular community, but how, I think this is what people always say, like people don't join cults. They don't join cults. They join communities that they feel like they can, share in the engagement with the people that are there, that they're drawn to for different reasons, whether
very
there's
true.
spiritual stuff or family stuff. And I think I've heard from a lot of people that people joined Trina and Steven's cult because of this family moment, like you were talking about feeling like Steven was there when you were going through the birth of your child.
Yeah, yeah,
And they were very good about those kinds of things. Like you were surrounded by people that you felt like cared about you. And if you came from a background of feeling like you had people that were parents or family that were not involved, this felt different.
definitely. Supportive family, big one. And as we were growing our family,
Yes,
yeah, it felt very supportive at that time.
for sure.
Briefly, that was what attracted us, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the spiritual side, and there was a spiritual side because Faye and I have a deep spiritual nature. So that that supported that part as well, you see.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, David.
Most welcome.
Hope you guys
Thank you, Brooke.
enjoyed. Yeah, thank you. Hope you
And
guys enjoyed. Go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you for the work you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
I found you on YouTube, I think, or wherever it was, I guess Facebook or something. But then I ended up discovering the work you were doing and couldn't help but respond because it's very important work.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I I mean, a lot of people have reached out to me because of it, and that's been phenomenal. I didn't think it was going to be so many people from the same group that I was in.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, anything that can contribute to the healing,
100%.
I'm for it all the way. So thank you much.
Thank you. And
You're
thank you,
welcome.
everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful day.